So Paul, you want to join us?
I will.
Welcome, Paul.
Talk about being unprepared. I still had the original agenda where I was on later on this morning. I was thinking about having a lie-in, so I'm glad I didn't. Morning, everybody. Thanks for staying to the third day. One thing I can say about when you speak towards the end of a conference, it's interesting when you reflect on what you've written to speak, and it's nice to have some of it validated by some of the presentations that have gone before you. But this is unashamedly a talk about Yellow Pages and the industry in which most of us, or many of us in this room, have grown up with. I spent most of my life in this industry. And it's a presentation specifically for this audience in this room, because Asia's reasonably unique these days in the sense that there are still a number of Yellow Pages companies still in existence. And by that I mean Yellow Pages companies that have print directories as well as online. And for those of you who are still in the Yellow Pages business in Asia, you have businesses where print still makes up the lion's share of your business. In fact, in some cases, as much as 80 or 90% of your business. That is certainly not the case in Europe and North America. In fact, by this time next year, there will probably be only one country left in Europe that is still publishing print directories. That will be Germany. Plus, I think if you add Canada and the USA, there probably won't be too many other countries outside of Asia and Africa, Middle East, where Yellow Pages is still printed. As Charles has said, I do have a fair bit of experience in this industry. I spent 20 years in the executive team at Yale in both the UK and the US. I had many different roles. I started in sales, worked myself up to sales director, became marketing director, spent many years doing mergers and acquisitions and growing our footprint in other countries outside of the UK. So I left Yale 10 years ago, and for the last 10 years I've worked as a consultant, and I've worked with the executive teams of most of the other publishers that you can see on that, well, all of the other publishers on that, on there. And I've called this talk the 25 reasons for failure of this industry. And this industry has in generally failed. And I'll put that into some kind of context. The height of the Yellow Pages industry, it was worth well in excess of $30 billion in terms of just bottom line revenue. In fact, just 12 years ago, the US market alone was worth $18 billion. That's all, and that was all print. Yeah, if you look at the Yellow Pages industry today, print makes up globally about 1 billion. So we've gone from 30 billion to 1 in barely 12 years.
Sounds like Kodak.
You just took my words away. I was just about to say that's a Kodak moment for this industry. Yeah, and by most definitions, if you go from 30 to 1 in the space of 12 years, you've pretty much failed. And so to those of you in this room who still have businesses where print is the dominant piece of your business, then hopefully what I'm about to say may resonate, and hopefully you can learn from it and avoid some of the mistakes that others have made. To protect the guilty, I'm not mentioning any specific companies by name. Most of my observations are generic, and you can apply them pretty much to most people in this industry. There are far more tales of woe than there are of success, unfortunately. So they're in no particular order, but I think this one is a good one to start with. Because I think if you roll back 20 years ago to when the internet was starting to kick off, I think most of us, or most people in this industry thought, well, we have to be in digital, but I don't think anyone really took it as a serious strategic option. It was a case where we have to be there, but we don't really know what question we're answering. And of course, initially, many people just saw digital as just another channel. And by that, it just meant replicating what they had in print in online. Literally, page for page, ad for ad. In fact, I remember going to a YIPA conference in Las Vegas in 1997, and one of the technology vendors in the exhibition area had this wonderful technology where you could touch a screen and flick a page, just as you are moving the page in a book. Of course, one of the other technologies around that time of the late 90s, and we were guilty of it at Yale, was you'd produce the book in a CD-ROM format. I'm sure there's a few youngsters in this room who don't even know what the hell a CD-ROM is. But it was, just literally an online replication of the print book. And I think what that led to was, very different strategies or different management approaches being taken inside Yellow Pages companies, where there was no real alignment in terms of where digital sat inside the organization. In fact, in most companies that I was aware of at the time, digital was just launched as another channel. In many businesses, it was just as a little island piece of the business, just try and keep it as far away from the print business as possible. And it certainly wasn't strategic. The folks who worked in the online piece were seen as pretty geeky and techie guys, and try and keep them away from the rest of the business as far as possible, which probably wasn't necessarily the smartest move to make. And I think it's worth reflecting back for those of us who are old enough to remember what it was like around the late 90s when the dot-com boom was going on. You've got to remember, very, very few companies, if any, made any money in the early days of the internet. If you think around those times from the late 90s to the early mid-2000s, you didn't see many, dot-com, all right, they may have had crazy valuations on the stock market, but not many of them were turning in any black numbers. And you've got to remember, this is a time when, the only three things in life that were certain were death, taxes, and profits in print Yellow Pages. And so it was very, very hard, if you like, to take, Yellow Pages executives to take online seriously when they had a print product that was delivering margins, in many cases, well in excess of 50%. And on some of these slides, you'll see some quotes in blue. And during the course of, over the last couple of years, I've done quite a lot of research, both into the Yellow Pages brand and where it is today compared to where it used to be. And more recently, I've done some research into what different companies have done in terms of their digital transformation journeys. And the quotes you see in blue are actually quotes that I got during the course of that research from senior leaders and C-level execs in former Yellow Pages companies, or some of them who are still there. There's not many of them. And these are the quotes that they gave me. And so, yes, there was definitely an addiction to that margin that you got from print. And in many cases, we held off going into digital for as long as we could. Neil showed a slide yesterday with lots of people with their heads in the sand. And I think that was the case for many of the executives in this industry. We had this single-minded focus, just purely on revenue and EBITDA. We didn't measure customer numbers. We didn't measure, the number of products people were buying. We didn't measure, how many of them were populating the new channels. It was just purely about revenue and EBITDA. Remember, this was at a time, if you go back to particularly to the early 2000s, many Yellow Pages companies were still owned by telcos. Some of you in this room are still owned by telcos. Around that time, telcos were desperate for cash. They needed cash to invest in the new mobile infrastructure and broadband infrastructure. And quite a lot of the former incumbent telco publishers ended up being sold off and IPO'd because they were very, very profitable businesses. I remember when Yellow Pages in the UK was part of British Telecom. We were less than a tenth, I think less than a 20th of their revenues, rather. Yet we were something like a quarter of their profits. So we were hugely profitable businesses, and our owners there, really wanted to capitalize on that. And obviously we had, huge stock market offerings with massive IPOs and massive valuations all over the world. Most of the European publishers got sold off, and certainly quite a lot of the large ones in the US. And I think the quote here is quite a relevant one. At a time of great change, it can be argued that we were focusing on the wrong things, and that's because our new owners, many, this was at a time when private equity was starting to take really serious interest. Yale, we were bought, or we were first acquired by Hicks Muse, a Texas-based private equity company. Some of you in this room are owned by private equity companies. They just want to get in, make a fast buck, and get out. They don't really care too much about your long-term interests in customers and growing a sustainable future. And therefore, it caused this dichotomy of, I call it speeding and braking at the same time. Trying to balance the wishes of your owners and your shareholders versus what you really should be doing, and that is focusing on the needs of your customers. And as a consequence, some of the communication that took place between owners and so the leadership teams of the companies and the people who owned them, there was a lot of mixed communication. Very, very few companies in this industry were doing anything to future-proof their businesses. I think back those times now and how crazy they were. You'd go into meetings with bankers. Some of the meetings we had with the likes of Goldman's and Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley, they're almost throwing cash at us to go and make acquisitions. But not acquisitions in the digital space. They just want us to go and buy more print companies because print was where the margin was. That was a huge mistake when you look back in retrospect. And as I say, our M&A focus, in the period between 1999 and 2007, Yale made 94 acquisitions, and every single one of them was a print Yellow Pages company. We didn't make one acquisition in the digital space. It turned out to be a huge mistake. And of course, what happened in 2008, the global financial crisis came along, and there we were burdened with something like $4.5 billion in debt, and I don't think we ever wrote a black number ever since. And it's easy to look back in hindsight. We can all look back in hindsight and say we should have done it differently. But I did spend a year working for PwC, and it was interesting. During that time, I got to see some of the really detailed financials behind some of the companies in this industry. And what really came home to me during that work was this point. The C-level executives in pretty much every Yellow Pages company around the world, most C-level execs were paid around just one thing, and that was to deliver a profit check to the owner. There was nowhere in any of the objectives for the senior team in most Yellow Pages companies, to grow that business and build a sustainable future in digital. It was just keep delivering, that creamy, rich milk and profit. And as it turned out, that just it dried up. And I'll put it into context. And I wish my good mate James Ciuffatelli was here, because he and I still laugh about this. But I worked for Census from 2010 until 2013. In 2008-9, Census had a market valuation of between, depending on who you ask, 10 and $12 billion. In less than 4 years, Platinum Equity. They acquired Census in January 2012, whenever it was, for less than 500 million. In less than 4 years, the value of that company, had gone to a fraction, from nearly 12 billion down to less than $500 million in less than 4 years. And here's, I think, one of the key reasons why. And another factor was not only did many of the C-level execs in this industry not really have a great lot of technical backgrounds. I remember many of these companies were born out of old utility legacy businesses, and and it wasn't the sexiest product. We admit that. And therefore the brand image suffered. And it's if you look back, particularly through that period, sort of around 2008 after the global financial crisis hit. But prior to that, when all these companies were IPOing and their stocks were rising, like a hockey stick, we were the darling of the financial press. Yet almost overnight the press turned on us, and this industry hadn't planned for its future, and all of a sudden, became an embarrassment, and, executive teams were being changed, company names were being changed all over the place. Pretty much every publisher around the world changed its name to some cool, funky, digital sounding whatever. Some of the names didn't even mean anything. But all we were doing really was putting lipstick on a pig, to coin a phrase. Here's another reason where I think this industry made a huge mistake, and not just the industry, but also the associations who represent this industry. Bearing in mind, very few Yellow Pages companies outside of the US competed with each other. In the UK, we had the UK, French publisher had the France, Belgian publisher had Belgium, Ireland had Ireland. We never ever chose to collaborate and come up with a global deal against Google. Google created the perfect storm, or we almost created it for them. We all decided we were going to negotiate our own deals with Google. We created the perfect storm for Google. Where all the heavy lift was on our side, and yet all the dollars were going to Mountain View. And again, during that work I did with PwC, you looked at some of the contracts that publishers were doing with Google. And publishers were making absolutely zero money. They were selling Google just because it looked good and because the customer wanted to talk about it. And we've pretty much, given our lunch on a plate to Google. Another concern at the time was this fear of cannibalization. Well, if anyone's going to eat my lunch, I'd much rather it was one of my products that was eating my lunch rather than somebody else. But to incentivize your teams to continue selling print when the market no longer wanted print, was just a complete false economy. Another reason why I think this industry failed is because many of the leadership teams were risk averse. I wouldn't say there were too many gung-ho leaders in this industry. And again, many of them had gotten fat and rich on the profits of Yellow. As a consequence, no one wanted to lead their company into the abyss. And remember, there was no proven model to do so as well. And Yellow Pages companies, had very high barriers to entry. The systems and processes associated with publishing Yellow Pages were quite cumbersome and fixed. And to invest in the new stuff was going to mean completely changing everything, your IT systems, everything, the whole way you went to market. And it was a very nice, easy fit in the old world. And we made the mistake of trying to fit the new world into the processes and systems of the old, rather than starting anew, and trying to adapt the old world into what should have been the new processes to sell digital. And I would say, above all, for those of you who still have to go through your transformations, don't try and make digital fit into your print business. think about building a new digital business and make your existing print business fit into the requirements of the new world. Because here's the real conundrum, and very, very few publishers, or pretty much every publisher around the world, was too late to wake up to this fact. Because as we were losing dollars from our print product, nobody really woke up to the fact that you needed between $3 and $5 of new digital revenue to deliver the same margin that you got for every lost dollar in print. And that is going to be the reality for every one of you in this room as you go through your transformations from print to digital. You have to prepare for this. So you've either got to bring down your cost of acquisition or your cost per sale, change your processes in some way, or have a damn shit good digital product that people are going to buy tons of it. Because this really was the killer for most of the publishers that I worked with. And of course you get into that death spiral, of trying to cost cut your way out of. What is the one thing we train our reps constantly when a customer says he wants to cut his advertising budget? No, it's the last thing you should be cutting, Mr. Customer. Invest in your future. At a time when there's a recession, that's the time when you should be advertising the most because, but we didn't practice what we preached. And cost-cutting measures were drastic, and cutting cost is fine, but I've never seen a business, I don't just consult in this industry. I'm yet to see any company anywhere that has built a growth strategy out of hemorrhaging cost. And I know this is a debate I was having with somebody the other night. Auto renewal, we all thought, great, just take those lower value customers, or the ones who have the same ad in the same book, in the same heading and the same size every year. Let's just auto renew them. Let's save the cost of sending a rep. Let's just do them by post or do them automatically. Yeah, what a big mistake that is. Any of you in this room who are still doing auto renewal or considering auto renewal, I can tell you fact, I don't know one single company anywhere in the world that has made profit out of auto renewal. Auto renewal has been a disaster everywhere it's happened. It's not a cost-cutting measure. Remember, at a time when you should be talking about new stuff. In fact, digital transformation gives you the opportunity to embark on a new conversation with every single one of your customers. So if anything, this should be an opportunity for you to literally have a face-to-face or at least a telephone conversation with every one of your customers. Certainly don't start dealing with them through remote channels without having a conversation with them first. And once you get into that death spiral of cost cutting, then you start going to outsourcing. Outsourcing, I remember certainly at Yale, outsourcing proved ultimately to be a disaster. And our customer numbers began to hemorrhage. Because if you think about it, very, very rarely do you find an outsourcing company that will care about your customers as much as you do. And you may think you're cutting costs, but and remember, most businesses exist to make a profit. So even though you're cutting costs and you're giving money to somebody else, remember around 30% of what you're giving to them, they're just putting straight into their bottom line. So again, there's no shortcut, to be achieved through cost cutting or outsourcing. Here's one that I really do believe many companies were guilty of this. We were a very sales-led business. And by sales-led, I mean sales made most of the key decisions in terms of what we did and how we did it. We were certainly not market-led. We were not led by market conditions or product or by customer. And if you look at the world of digital, you think about some of the presentations you've seen over the last 2-3 days. If you are not appeasing your customers or helping your customers' customers these days, then you're pretty much going to be dead in the water. But if you look at the Yellow Pages business traditionally and how we operated, and some of you probably are still operating, in the ways of the old world, pretty much 90% of what we did was for our benefit. Very little of what we did was genuinely customer focused. And this was a big learning for many of us. And of course, we had a sales method that worked great when we were the only game in town. Donat Retief, the former CEO of Truvo, once stood up at a YIPA conference and described it as the annual drive-by shooting. We would get in there, see the customer, extract a need out of him, hold him to ransom for as much money as we could out of him, and then not go back and see him again for 12 months. That go-to-market process, certainly is no longer fit for purpose. And you need to be talking to your customers far more frequently than once every 12 months. And as I touched on earlier, we had very rigid cyclical processes. This one-size-fits-all go-to-market approach. That doesn't work anymore. And as I said in my introduction, and I say it particularly to those of you in this room who are going through this journey, build your processes around your customer, and then structure your organization around that. Don't try and fit the digital world into your current structure or your current organization, or you will fail. There are plenty, of examples, to refer to that show you that doesn't work. And, I think I touched on it yesterday when I was commenting on someone else's presentation. Salespeople are pretty, simple, fickle creatures. They will do what you pay them to do. And I know, I've been working with some people in this industry recently. If you try and incentivize your people just to sell a particular product ahead of one other, without letting the market decide which of your products they want to buy, then again you're treading on very sticky turf. At the end of the day, the market should decide how good your products are and what you buy. So don't incentivize. Up until very recently, I still saw publishers, paying more commission if you sold print ahead of digital, because obviously we want to keep as much print as possible because that's where all the margin is. Change your pricing structure or do whatever, but target and measure, for the outcomes and behaviors that you want to see, and it's self-explanatory. Another common observation I have of this industry, and I think the telco industry is also very guilty of this. We try and build everything in-house. We have traditionally been appalling at building partnerships and alliances. If you look at most legacy Yellow Page companies and telco companies, you have huge IT departments, and we feel obligated to keep them employed. These days, finding partners who are smarter and often with better technology than you've got is by far and away the best way to go about it. And bearing in mind we live in an era where speed to market is absolutely critical. Don't feel that you have to just keep your IT teams, permanently employed, because, certainly in the West, IT resource is extremely expensive, and, not necessarily always speedy, and this obsession with building stuff in-house was certainly, something I could look around many publishers and say was a critical component into the reason why they failed. And just building on that, this sort of phobic attitude towards having partners coming in, there was always this very arrogant and conceited stance that, we are who we are. We are the Yellow Pages, and you will just be a supplier to us. And we have this, customer-vendor relationship rather than entering into true partnerships. And one of the refreshing things I see now, particularly in the companies who have come through their transformations and who are now starting to carve out, a more secure and profitable future, is we now see, many of the supplier community who are in this room as true partners as opposed to just vendors, and long may that continue. Somebody touched on it yesterday. I think it may have been Elise in her piece, and Neil certainly touched on it. One of the big failings of this industry, and it may have been born out of those legacy systems and processes, but our back office was terrible. I remember, when I worked at Census, just making, a customer who had a digital product, if you wanted to make a very simple amendment to that product, and I'm going back to 2011, 2012 now, but it would take 30 working days to make an amendment to a website. 30 days. And there's probably, why has this industry lost most of its customers to the I Got It guys who are building websites in their bedroom and that kind of stuff? I'll tell you why. It's because the guy in his bedroom could make that change in 30 seconds, not 30 days. And our back office fulfillment, is, and many people have touched on it. But these days it's less about your sales process and often more about your fulfillment and back office that determines whether you keep and retain customers. And certainly, I can look back to my old company at Yale, and as I say, we outsourced, we cost cut and we outsourced. And sure as heck, I remember when I left the company, we were close to having, we were just about at 500,000 paying advertisers. You look at Yale today and it's got barely 100,000. So it's got 20% of the customers it had 10 years ago. And this is a major cause of why it's got fewer customers. Another critical failure across the board was we just didn't invest in digital talent. We thought we knew it all. All these geeky tech people, we don't need to employ them. We know how to make money. And that was a terrible attitude to have. And I suppose it leads nicely into my overarching sort of final reason that, I think, when you look at the reason why this industry generally has failed, you can say it's a combination of either ignorance or arrogance, or a combination of the two. And I sincerely hope that, I certainly know as somebody who has been through it, there are many, and certainly talking to a lot of former execs from this industry, every one of them, given their time again, would do it very, very differently next time round. But sadly, it's too late. I love this quote, and I use it a lot in the consulting world. The great Jack Welch, the former chairman of GE, when the rate of change outside your business exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is near. And unfortunately, too many of us didn't pay heed to that advice. But I hope you've taken something out of this. And for those of you in the room who, I hope I haven't scared you, because this is, I'll say this as a concluding remark. The reason why the Yellow Pages business was so successful for so long, the underlying business model for why this industry was the success that it was, i.e., helping buyers find sellers and sellers find buyers, that underlying core reason why we existed and made money all those years ago is still the underlying reason why commerce happens today. We just have to find new ways to do it, and new ways to face up to those changes. So I hope you've taken something out of this, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Paul. Anyone have a question? Neil and Peter. We'll start with Neil. Or Peter's got the mic. Okay.
No, I agree with a lot of what you were saying, Paul. I challenged some of the points, just two in particular. First of all, you said at the beginning that the decline of print revenue from 30 billion down to 1 billion was an indication of failure. That's not quite right, is it? Shouldn't it be the 30 billion of print revenue compared with today's revenue of the legacy publishers?
Yeah.
I agree it's a lot less than 30 billion.
Okay.
So
yeah, sorry, I should have qualified that. That 30 billion, if I look at the total revenue of those companies that contributed to that 30 billion, today it'd be around 7.
Right.
So you're still a quarter of where you were.
Yes, I agree, but it's
That's still a failure in my book.
I agree, I agree with that. But it's not comparing 30 with 1.
No, but I'm
right?
saying that 30 was all in print.
Yeah.
The print today is 1, but the substitution into digital, we've only managed to save 6.5 of it.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I was simply
that's my
challenging
point.
to say 30 down to 1
No,
is
no,
not
no,
an
you're right.
indication of
Correct.
failure.
Absolutely.
I think that point's
The second point relates to the private equity phase that the Yellow Pages publishers went through. And I agree wholeheartedly that had a significant impact on the development of the industry, but through its short-termism and whatever. But I wouldn't describe that as a mistake. That was a consequence of what telcos were doing and what private equity companies wanted.
I'm not saying that wasn't, for me, that wasn't the mistake. The mistake was how they were directing our leadership to invest their money.
Right.
The mistake was to keep buying print.
Yeah, but who made the mistake?
Well, having been party, to quite a lot of those meetings where we were arguing the case to buy digital companies, the response you would get, but there's no margin there. There's no margin there. We know there's safe margin by going after more print companies. That's why Yell's acquisition strategy was purely and solely predicated around buying more print businesses.
So you're saying the CEOs of the Yellow Pages companies were making the mistake of...
Well, they were being guided by the banks to continue just investing in the old stuff and not investing in the new. You look around, this very, I don't know that many publishers anywhere that were buying digital businesses.
In terms of acquisition, I would understand that. But on the other hand, there were certainly many private equity shareholders who would be amazed if a CEO of Yellow Pages company was recommending investing in print.
Oh no, far from it. When we were going saying, I remember, Joe saying I wanted to buy Transwestern, or Condren wanted to buy TPI in Spain. The money was just, it was magic out of nowhere. Yeah, you got it. Go and buy it. But I thought if we were to say, we need $1.5 billion to go and buy a digital company, they would have fought tooth and nail to give you the money.
Okay, I've certainly been in many sessions where the private equity company has more or less told the Yellow Pages guy to stop printing because nobody uses print anymore, do they? Type of approach.
Well, that may be the case recently, but certainly in the noughties when the big acquisition phases were going on, I didn't sit in a single session where they were saying don't do print.
Wow.
You're in different meetings.
We're sitting in different meetings, Paul. That's okay.
I would just say that imagine if all the money that had been invested in this industry by private equity instead were invested by VCs, and how radically different the outcome might have been.
Totally.
And that's really, I think that's really more, I think that's more of the lesson here is that, PEs is, you get what you sign up for, and that's what the industry got.
Well, look at those businesses that were acquired by PEs. A lot of those PEs have gone.
They're out. They got their money.
They don't hang around.
Dumb and fat and happy.
They're about financial engineering, not building
They
businesses.
don't hang around for too long.
That's right.
If
That's why they did the deals.
You got PE in your business and they're there for more than 3 or 4 years, then
But imagine just how if it had been VC money, which drives a totally different behavior.
Well, VC money, they insist that you have
a growth. That's right.
That you future-proof your business.
Just,
there was none of that going on.
No.
None of that going on.
But when digital acquisitions did happen, they weren't particularly successful. As a general statement.
Well, again, around that time, there weren't that many digital companies that were showing profit.
Right, but I'm saying when they happened, they weren't. There's not the acquisition success story, is there?
Yeah. Because if you think about it, that .com boom and bust, there were far more stories of failure in the .com world than there were of success. Print was still, as you say, death taxes and profits in print was still there. Rajiv.
We got another question.
All right. There are lessons to be learned from history. I think.
Sorry, one here and then one here.
Right. We've got these lessons here, but what's the future, Paul? I think I'm going to allude specifically to point number 11, which is Google and the YP industry stirring the perfect storm for it. We are doing the same thing right now.
I still think there is a case for this industry to work together.
That's what I mean.
Bearing in mind, certainly I don't think here in Asia any of you guys compete with each other. So why don't you talk to each other more often and share learning and experience? For me, one of the great things we used to have when we used to attend the Yellow Pages Publishers Conference every year is we would share case studies and ideas of new initiatives and products or whatever, or go-to-market strategies, whatever, that worked, and we would share them with our peers, and you would always come away having learned 2 or 3 new things that you would then take back and implement into your own organization. I just don't see that happening anymore. I've been coming to these events for 25 years. You come to these events these days, half the talks more often than not are vendor pitches, just buy my product, I've got the next big thing in digital, whatever. Whereas I would workshop a lot more of these sessions into let's share best practice. Let's see what works. Who has found the best way of making profit out of social media or whatever the topic may be, and do it that way. I genuinely think there's still a hell of a lot to be gained from associations such as this, the one that we've just founded in Africa with Cinder in Europe with LSA. There's a hell of a lot of work we can still do together to craft out a better and more sustainable future for this industry. Yeah.
Now, Paul, I want to ask, one of the things that you suggested was that the cost-cutting methods were too drastic. Could you give us some examples of what those cost-cutting methods were?
Yeah, moving customer service to India and the Philippines. Some of the issues that you get with language, some of the issues that you get with people not really understanding the internal operations and processes of the business. The old, computer says no type answers you would get from outsourced suppliers. Cheap production, and again, mainly in offshoring. I can't remember who said it, but one of the people I spoke to said, if you're going to outsource, never ever outsource something that is a core competency inside the business. And I think that's a good lesson.
Okay, one more.
Yes, I'm appreciated by the idea that you said that Yellow Pages should be cooperate more. But I think when we look at what happened here is that we have 2 different things that happening. One is we are the location-based sale. So when we location-based, it's difficult to be cooperate. But if we look at other service, like the world becoming more connected, the region, some of the service or the product can ship worldwide, and like a B2B service or something like that, B2B product. And maybe I think there is some people saying idea that we can cross-sell this thing, or maybe we can do something together. I heard that sometime before. I don't know what happened to that.
Whether you share, if I look around the world, some people are selling great products, and there are products that work, products that don't work. I think there's a lot of knowledge you can share.
Yeah, but when you see the Alibaba or Google or whatever, you see they are the center point of everything, So if all the Yellow Pages combine together, we will be the center point of everything too,
Well, yeah, but I think if you look at the likes of Google in particular, you've left it too late. You've all got your own individual deals with Google. My point is, had the industry clubbed together, and had a single negotiating point, then it would have been you could have probably got a far better deal for yourselves.
Yes.
You're saying that opportunity is no longer.
Than allowing them to steal the tablecloth and your lunch from underneath your nose.
Yes, but maybe how that's going to start.
Well, I'm saying it's already done, but I think there are. You got to remember, we live in an industry that is constantly evolving and constantly being disrupted. There'll be something else. I guarantee there'll be something we're talking about in 5 years' time that hasn't even launched yet.
It's a global trade, the e-commerce, and anything.
Whatever. Yeah. So my point is, there's nothing stopping you from talking to your peers and saying, well, how have you done this? How have you gone about doing that? I remember, one of the reasons why Michael Oshman, and I are good friends, is that, towards my time in Yale when I was looking after external relations, he and I just shared some ideas around how we should be selling, whether or not we should be selling websites, and if we did, how would we go about taking them to market and so forth. That was at a time when nobody was selling websites, but at least, we shared ideas with another publisher, where, we didn't compete with them, but we were both facing the same problem. And that's what I'm saying to all of you in this room. You're all facing similar problems and conundrums, and there's no reason why, if you see something going well in another market, pick up the phone and speak to your peer equivalent in that company and say, well, how are you doing that? I noticed you've been doing very well with this product. How did you make that a success or whatever? I just don't think enough of that is going on, and I think there is an opportunity for that to happen.
All right, so what we're going to do now, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Paul.